your employees, I'm so sorry to say this, they don't really care about your organizational goals. What they care about is how would they become successful as a result of following those goals. The remarkability is not the point. Can it change something at the ground level? Can people go, that is exactly what happens with me, let me change it? That's the point of the story. Every time you have a business message that sounds like common sense, obvious, correct, but will fail to connect, you need a story around it. A minimal story is more than enough. When I say minimal, it means like a short story. When organizational heads say, those are my goals and targets and all that, yes, I agree, and I need to drive profit. But if I become obsessed with how these goals and targets will make people successful, then I will be able to tell a good story.
Well, here we are.
Here we are, finally.
Here we are. So I'm really happy having you in the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So I know, based on my conversations with you, I know that you like to go straight to the point. So let's cut to the chase, and let me ask you. So what can people expect from this conversation?
I think from our discussions, the promise of the podcast really is for anybody, whether it's a leader or an entrepreneur who's trying to make a change happen and wants to use stories as a tool. We'll talk about a lot of success stories. We'll talk a lot about the way you can use stories. We'll talk about real life example. We'll step away from the bookish knowledge about storytelling. And I would say that we'll step away from the kind of storytelling that is practiced on stage as well. We'll talk about what happens in the dreaded boardroom and how can you make a change happen with stories. So I think that's the promise of this podcast.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. Okay, so let me start by asking you, today there's so much talk about storytelling, it's like a buzzword. I think maybe let's start by understanding what is not storytelling.
Okay, so I think when you look at it from a corporate point of view, which is largely the space that I work in, it's not unusual for us to hear a communication like, our story is that of being digital first. Our story is of innovation and of driving collaboration to enhance our operating practices. That is not a story. That is a whole lot of words. Now that may be correct, but it is not something that will connect. So it's a very abstract communication that you see in organizations, and organizations have just bought into this fallacy that that's a story. That's not a story. So those words are correct, and you do need to bring that connection to the correct, you need to wrap a story around it. And a story, essentially a definition of a story, is that there is a character who faces a certain situation, and as a result of what kind of actions this character takes, there are consequences. So if there are no characters and there are no emotions, it's not a story. Where is emotion in collaboration and digital first and enhancing our operating practices? All of that is correct, but it doesn't connect. And the job of the communication is to make a connection.
Well, not tell us about the story, but can you show us the power of storytelling?
Okay, so this, if you've ever watched a TED Talk, that is, you witness the power of storytelling, right? All the time. But I think I'm going to try and reframe your question slightly. In an organizational setup, in the corporate storytelling or the business storytelling, some people call it, the kind of story that the one that works, puts more focus on resonance and relatability than remarkability. So on a stage, you listen to a story that's like clapping and you're like, wow, what a story. Those are very high engagement stories. Stories like a pilot landed a plane in the Hudson River, stories like a building collapsed, stories which are like large, unexpected. But those are not the kind of stories we look for to make a change happen in organizations, because there's lack of relatability in them, right? Those are not, people don't sit around and say, that building is going to collapse ever.
Yeah.
You know, so we have to look for stories that actually resonate and are relatable. Now I'll answer your question. So if you're trying to tell a story with purpose, which is to make a change happen in an organization, you're not telling a story for entertainment. Movies are entertaining, classic novels are entertaining, but in an organization, a story is told for a purpose. You want people to get up and take an action in a certain direction, or else there's no point telling the story.
Yeah. You are in contact with many CEOs and top leaders. Where do you think they struggle in terms of stories?
Okay, so the struggle begins in the mind before it actually comes, it sort of comes to surface in conversations with me. There is this perception of storytelling, which is to get up on the stage and be as inspirational and try to be like Steve Jobs and Martin Luther King and all that sort of stuff. That is not, if you can be that, fantastic. But I think you don't need to be that level of aspirational. You can be relatable. I think people think that that's the ask. The ask is to just be able to get up and rah-rah thousands of people by your charisma. I must say this, I've always sort of really questioned the power of charisma in terms of getting your message across. But my thinking was perfectly sort of put in place and said, you're thinking the right thing when I read that book by Jim Collins, Good to Great. He actually talks level 5 of leadership where charismatic leaders are not the best leaders. So storytelling and its association with charisma is the biggest challenge. Nobody's asking you to do that. And I think that's where the resistance comes, because how many of us get up in the morning and look at ourselves in the mirror and say, oh my God, I'm so charismatic. None of us think like that. In fact, we think the opposite. Oh my God, how do I do this? Right? So I think we need to drop that. There's nobody who's asking you to be charismatic.
Yeah, what I like is more a story. It's about being relatable,
right?
Not
aspirational.
Not aspirational. I really, really, really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. If people finish listening to the leader and they forget the message and only remember the leader, there's something fundamentally wrong about that.
Yeah.
They need to remember the message. They shouldn't be getting caught up in the charisma. And why leader? Even for me, if I go and speak in any organization and all people remember is that Anjali came and spoke and they forget what exactly I spoke about, there's a problem. I need to change something. So I think that's the issue, that's the struggle that's in the mind. And then I'll come to the second layer after they meet us. After they meet us, our challenge is that their thinking is at a very high level. It's not grounded in the realities. So they're very clear about the mega trends. They're clear about geopolitical environment. They're clear about uncertainties through war and stuff like that. They know what's going on. Now, when I ask them to connect it back to the people on the ground, so for example, I take a leader and I say, you talked about labor shortages and talent crises over here. Tell me how exactly this plays out in your organization. He or she, almost every single time, will struggle with giving me an example that supports that. At a high level, their thinking is correct. They just do not connect that. They're not able to connect that back to the examples of the cold face of their organization. That's where our journalistic work fills that gap.
So sometimes it's simple. It's about bringing simple stories, that resonate with people, not like very aspirational stories. That's the challenge that maybe leaders face. They think about stories, there's a pressure. It needs to be aspirational.
Yeah, so that's the first point that I mentioned. You're absolutely. Yeah. The second point is about connecting what's happening in the world to your organization. So you understand that certain economies are thriving economies and certain situations in near future will be wrong. You are very good in terms of being able to give that point of view. When I try to tell you to bring it back to your own people and say, okay, fine, you're now telling me that if we don't reshape our procurement policies to ensure that we are doing whatever is required to manage the whole climate change situation, what exactly does your procurement do?
Yeah.
They're like, oh, they need to, so it's a very broad level understanding. I think there's a wide gap between, they cannot pick out real examples and say, okay, so our engineer walks in and does this and does that. Maybe what we need to get him to do or her to do is this, this, and that. They're not able to bring it back
To connect.
To connect. That connection is a very wide gap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So tell us, what was one of the most fascinating stories that you've heard or you've seen from an organization to bring change?
Yeah, so organizational changes don't happen with a single story.
Yeah.
They're not a TED Talk. You get up there and you get millions of views and you did a really good job. I'm an absolute awe of people who give amazing TED Talks. But I think organizational change is very, very different. In organizational change, there's a plethora of stories. There's there's like this force of stories that comes from every angle that actually changes the way people look at it. And as I mentioned, that if I kind of just narrated a story to you, one of the stories to you, you'd find that story quite average. But the remarkability is not the point. Can it change something at the ground level? Can people go, that is exactly what happens with me, let me change it? That's the point of the story. So in the top of my head, I'm trying to, okay, I'll give you a very small example, right? So there was this one time when we were working in the organization where we were bringing AI models to the organization, right? So this company had the initiative that every department, irrespective of whether you are technology-led or not, whether you're sales, marketing, even customer support, you have to come up with an AI model that will make your work efficient and better. Now, the customer support team and marketing team is looking at it and said, I've just learned what AI stands for, and you are telling me to come up with an AI model? Like, are you kidding me? So what this brilliant leader that I always get to work with did was, he started looking at every single department, and what we did together was to build stories of, say, for example, a human resources professional, right? We had to tell a story, and this was the story. It said, 10 years ago, Matthew, it's not the real name, when you joined the organization, you were the face of the organization. When someone new came, you were the one who received, you're the one who did orientation, you did the first round of interviews, and when you thought this person is good enough, you then spoke to the business head and said, why don't you interview this person is really good. But let's look at now, Matthew. Now you're sitting on your desk and you are sorting CVs. Now, why is that happening? Because at that time, we had a few places to receive CVs from, through in the newspaper, the ad will go out. But today we are receiving CVs from LinkedIn, from this thing, from that thing, like CVs are flying in. So CVs have gone from this to this. You have gone from being the face of the company to a CV sorter. You don't ever see anyone. You sort CVs and then you give to the business and you say, these 10 people look like are the right people, why don't you interview them? You are like a back of the house person sorting CVs. Wouldn't you want to give this work of sorting CV to AI and do some more value-adding work? And then the HR professional was like, of course, it affects me. I want to do this. Wow. I want to learn. So we sat down and built stories for each type of a tribe in the organization and showed them why they should focus on learning AI. And then, of course, we provided change assistance. We provided them ways to be able to learn it. But there was a new level of motivation in people to want to learn AI. Wow. So that's the work we do. We don't, our work is not limited to make you Steve Jobs. I mean, if you become Steve Jobs, that's fantastic. But I think our primary focus is in helping you make a change happen in the organization. Oh. That's the focus.
Wow, that story, it's really good. I think as we're talking about stories, I need to ask you another story so that we can understand really the impact. Can you tell us another story?
Yeah, sure. So this is in 2017, I think, 2017. This was a French leader and one that I, who's left Singapore, but I still keep in touch with, and we exchange notes every now and then. What an amazing leader, right? So he decided to make the factory a smart factory. Essentially what that means is lights down, there are only robots going to be working in the factory. Robots don't need lights, right? And now there are 2,500 people in this factory. We're suddenly telling 2,500 people, hi, I have an announcement to make. Robots will work here and goodbye to you. Who's going to support him transform that factory into a smart factory? So I was like, we were asking for a change. How are we going to make a change happen? So we sit down together, and I remember sitting in his boardroom. I was like, okay, first answer my questions. I said, people think they're going to lose their job. is that true? He's like, if they don't change, they are going to lose their job. I said, what do you mean? Elaborate. He's like, Anjali, we make chips, semiconductor chips here. Okay? Now, the demand for semiconductor chips is rising like there's no tomorrow. If we keep our ways manual, our factory will have to shut down because it's not doing enough work to sustain the factory, and they will lose their jobs. I said, no, my question to you is, if the factory becomes smart factory, are you planning to retrench people? He says, yes. I said, then why should people support you? Tell me more. He says, yes, only if they are not willing to become supervisors of robots. I was like, tell me again. And he says, what that means is, I'm going to need someone to manage these robots, right? For that, they're going to have to stop being the factory workers and become supervisors of machine. So I said, we've got the story. So then we went on the ground, we started talking to people, right? I had like these conversation after conversation with so many people. And the story we told in the actual change thing, many stories were told, this was one of it. So we told story of this factory worker, her name is Su Ting. Again, not a real name. Su Ting joined the organization about 10 years ago. And Su Ting's job is to go fill up the rack with semiconductor chips on one end of the factory and take it to the other end. That's quite a long walking distance. Her job is to move product from A to B. When she started the job, she roughly does about 9 trips, roughly. Back, front, back, forth, back, forth. Today it's the same Su Ting, it's the same distance. Because the demand has increased, she has to go back, forth, back, forth. Can't remember the exact number, but roughly about 32 times. 9 to 32. Su Ting is not going to be able to sustain that. She needs to learn to give that bad job of just not very cerebral job of moving things back front to a robot. And what she needs to do is to become the supervisor of that robot and tell him where he has to work today, charge him, roster him, and we are willing to teach you that. The moment the factory workers learned, I in this factory can become the workforce of the future. This factory is going to teach me how to become the workforce of the future. I want to stay here. I want to learn. No other factories right now. This was at the time where in Singapore, a lot of factories are not talking about this. They had an opportunity to become the workforce of the future. We also very boldly said, even if you choose to leave this organization, you become a workforce that everybody wants to hire. Why wouldn't you want that? And everybody's face just changed and people wanted to learn. So, but we didn't come up with Su Ting as a fictional character. We found Su Ting because we wanted, after that thing is finished, narration is finished, we wanted people to go to water coolers, to smoking areas, walk out of the factory, finish their shift and talk about that. Did you hear that? Because if the story doesn't travel outside of that speech, then there's something wrong. It has to spread. It has to become a conversation. It has to become a lift conversation, which happened. It's very funny for me. Sometimes I go back into the organization, people tell me stories that I have worked with. So I'm like, that's an amazing story. That's fantastic. And it is really good because that's the validation that the work that we're doing actually makes a change happen in the organization.
Wow, those examples are so powerful.
They are.
So now let's understand. So in my organization, let's say, what are the 3 things that I can do in order to use storytelling to create change?
First thing for me would be to remove this need to feel that story work is only about telling. Okay, you are not maximizing the potential of a story if you're just focusing on telling. Okay, the stories are a lot more powerful. So once you've removed that mindset, the second thing that you can do is to really start applying stories in a very minimal fashion to business points, right? For example, we need to learn green skills. We need to learn green skills. Like, what does that even mean? How do you put a small story that actually makes people understand that abstract message? Begin there. Every time you speak something that sounds like common sense, and people go, okay, I already know this. I mean, whatever. If every time you feel like that, that means you need to put a story around it. Like, okay, we need to be more digital, data-driven. Okay, we need to be more data-driven. You need to add a story to that. It's that sandwich that becomes an amazing sandwich when you insert the story in it, right? So then start with simple business points that sound important, they're correct, but will fail to connect. The final thing you can do is to gain the power to really make sure that you listen to a lot of stories in the organization. And the way to get stories out of other people is to never ask them, why do you think that is the case? Don't ask them that. If someone says, I am finding very hard to work on this project, why? Don't do why. Okay, so, okay. So give me an example of what was the part, give me an example of when it was hard. Or on where were you when it was hard? Or when was it that you found it hard? So if you asked, just give me an example, or tell me more about that. You know, what was the experience like in that? Don't ask why questions. Just ask, give me an example, or share more about that experience that you had. You're going to get a lot of stories, and stories are super insightful. You will develop new thinking. So in summary, drop the point of view that story work is only about storytelling. Second, every time you have a business message that sounds like common sense, obvious, correct, but will fail to connect, you need a story around it. A minimal story is more than enough. When I say minimal, it means like a short story. And finally, get into the habit. When people say things, get them to give you a story to back that up. And don't ask why. Why always gives you all this, what is the term? TBU information. True, but useless. You know, it's true, but they'll give you all useless information. So you have to be able to then ask, share more an experience that actually validates that thing that you just said. Just like what you're doing for me, with me now. Tell me a story about that experience, right? So that's, elicit a story, get a story out of people.
Wow, I like it so much. And sometimes what people don't see is that sometimes it's all about listening. But also sometimes people don't know how to listen. So that's why I like it, is like there's some questions that bring the best stories out of people. And I really like not to say why, but tell me more about how they felt, right? And I really like that.
Yeah, the best definition, or not a definition, but the best thing I've ever read about listening is that listening is more than just shutting up.
Yeah.
Keeping quiet is not listening.
Yeah.
You know, if you're telling me something and you're just keeping quiet, that doesn't mean that you're listening.
Yeah.
It's the curiosity. I want to know more. Tell me exactly how. What happened? I think with listening, there are a couple of things that we've learned because we do so much listening of the stories. So it's more than keeping quiet. And the second thing is being comfortable with silence. Because if you build that silence, when someone doesn't say something, you just say, okay, take your time. I'm here. Just comfortable. Eventually, something brilliant surfaces if you are comfortable with silence. You have to build tension with silence, and that tension is usually amazing. It gets you really good stuff. That's why I love the journalistic work we do. It's really, really insightful. Almost every single time we do a project which involves the journalistic aspect of our work, what we walked into the project with, our hypothesis, is wrong. It's a completely different thing that is causing the issue that it is causing. So it proves us wrong every single time.
So, but now it takes to the point of, okay, but myself as a leader, how do I become a good storyteller? What do I have to do?
I think a beginning of the good storytelling is story listening, which we've already mentioned about. The other thing is a good storyteller. Okay, let me give you an example of a writer. So, writers are great storytellers, but what writers do wrong is they become obsessed with the characters in the story, right? And in a corporate world, leaders become obsessed with their goals and targets. And objectivity is a huge part of their communication. But as Steve Denning says, that objectivity is a distancing device, right? It just distances you. So just like a writer is obsessed with the character, a corporate leader is obsessed with the goals and targets, right? But when the writer says, I need to be obsessed with what my reader wants, everything changes. Then my writing would be loved naturally. Similarly, when organizational heads say, those are my goals and targets and all that, yes, I agree, and I need to drive profit. But if I become obsessed with how these goals and targets will make people successful, then I will be able to tell a good story, right? There's this wonderful story, by Nora Ephron, she's no more. She used to be a screenwriter. Her scripts have won, they've been nominated for some amazing awards. And she tells this wonderful story about her first journalism class. And she says that, we were sort of young, budding journalists, and we go our very first journalist class, and we have typewriters. Those were not the days of laptops and stuff. And our prof says to us, okay, everybody, today I'm going to teach you how to write a lead, right? So lead is really just that first line that you write that creates an interest for the rest of the article amongst people. People look at it and go, that's an interesting thing, so I want to read. It's like the thing that catches everyone's attention. Yeah. Standard way of writing a lead is who, how, when, where, all that sort of stuff, and then you create this one line with it. So the prof teaches them a little bit about the lead, and then he says, I'm going to now give you a story, and you're going to write a lead for that. So everybody's really excited because this is their first lead for their journalism career. So prof says, here's the story. The story is going to go into the local newspaper. The members of the community will be reading it. And the story is that next week, in Sacramento, California, there's going to be a conference, and all the teachers are required to go to that conference on Thursday and Friday. And the speakers of the conferences are ABCD, and the topics that we were discussing were ABCD, whatever that might be. Now you all write a lead. So all the students take their typewriters, start to write. And everyone focuses on who, what, where, when, how, and just comes up with a lead. The prof gets their leads, he looks at it and he goes, then he says, you're all wrong. And everybody's like, we are all wrong? Yeah, you're all wrong. The lead for the article should just have been this. Next Thursday, Friday, there's no school. Because who is this lead for? It's in the newspaper. The parents are going to read it. Parents don't care what you're going to cover in the conference and who's going to come. All they need to know is that their children are not going to school next Thursday, Friday, right? That, she says, was such a big lesson in storytelling, that journalism is not about regurgitating facts. Yeah. It is about being hyper obsessed with who the story is for. And I think we don't do a good job of that in a corporate setup. So to become a good storyteller, you have to first start with story listening, because then only you will know that your employees, I'm so sorry to say this, they don't really care about your organizational goals. What they care about is how would they become successful as a result of following those goals. So, and no organizational growth doesn't have an element of an employee success. If you look hard, you will always find how your employees become successful. And there are so many examples I can give you of that, right?
Please, this is so good. Can you give us an example?
So I'll start off with, when we built the smart factory story. Our promise to people was not like, let's make the smart factory, and then we will produce X amount of chips, more chips, on a quarterly basis. Our promise was, you will become the workforce of the future. We didn't even care about the increase in the chips, right? In 2016, I ran an 18-month-long project for 10,500 people for a really large digital company. And so 10,500 people were our audiences, and I was working directly with the CEO then. And I remember that, when I first got into the project, the way they used to talk about the change in the CRM system, they used to say, the reason why we want to change the CRM system is because we're losing market share. We are, have complex ways of working, and we have way too many systems that we need to look into. Most people sat there and thought that, I actually categorically remember one person saying this to me. She was just a telephone operator. She said, I don't get paid enough to worry about market share. I'm so sorry, right? Very candid, right? Then we figured out, in this growth, in this change to a new CRM system, how do these people become successful? And then we said the proposition here is that I can get my work done faster, better, and I have pride for the work that I will do.
Wow, I learned so much, really. Thank you for sharing so much value, because I really learned a lot.
Oh, I'm so glad.
And we're coming to the end, but I would like to ask you the last question. So many people ask you, a lot of questions, but what is one question that people didn't ask you and you would love to answer?
So I would actually say it's the question. It's not like the question that I'd love for them to ask me. I'd actually tell them to stop asking one question. Okay, there's
What
this
is
one question everybody wants to know is about, my personal narrative, like my personal stories. And I think this whole, I'm not here to be personally known. I'm here to make everyone who wants to engage with my work a better storyteller. And I think people have to stop focusing on this broadcasting of an authentic version of myself every single second. So people will ask me questions like, what are you doing today? And tell us how, what does it matter? Or, somebody's even asked me what kind of a pen and a diary you use. Like, what does it matter? Yeah. It's not going to make you better, right? So, no matter where I look, all the people that I admire are not known for their personal stories. They're known for the ideas they've brought to the world and the work that they've done in this world. And I discipline myself every day where I say that if a softball question gets thrown at me, which is about me and not about the work that I do, then I'm going to try and dodge that question and get out of it somehow. I want to be known for the work that I do. I don't want to be known personally. It's not something, I'm not shy at all, but I don't think it adds value. I think it just creates entertainment for people, and I'm not here to entertain. I'm here to educate as much as I can.
Wow, and you're doing so well.
Thank you.
Well, that's so good. I loved our conversation, Anjali.
Oh, thank you. Such a pleasure. Thank you for asking brilliant questions. I enjoyed myself too.
No, it was. I think there were a lot of things that opened, and I really understood the power of storytelling, how it can really bring change in an organization, and how can we as a leaders, just sometimes by simply listening, and also always try to use a simple story to bring your message. It will be more impactful. And the last one that you said that got me was about like just focus on what's in there for people. Don't focus on your goals or because if you help people, the rest will happen.
I think, the thing is, you can't lose sight of the goals because you are there to do that job. But a promise to achieve the goals doesn't have to come with a promise to not look after your staff.
True.
And I think if you put the lens of success and, in that lens, you can see in the horizon, you can see your organization's success, you can see your success. Equally at that horizon should be the people. They're also succeeding at the same time. And if you shift the narratives in those directions, you would see what a powerhouse you become. It just, there's this thing about when you sit on a bus, again, it's from this book, Good to Great, if the bus has to go to a certain destination, before even you think about the destination, you got to think about who's on the bus. Don't think about where you're taking the bus. Think about who's on the bus is more important than where the bus is going. Once you have the right people on the bus will find where to go.
That's a great book.
Yeah, it is.
Good. So thank you so much. And keep telling stories and bringing change in organizations.
Thank you very much for having me. And you keep doing this amazing work you're doing, spreading all this knowledge and all this, amazing insights for the rest of the world. Hats off to you for doing this consistently and doing it in such quality fashion. I want to say kudos to you as well. It's not easy. As a content creator, I know what it takes.
Oh my God, thank you so much.
Thank you.